Okay, hey, welcome to Dungeon Punk How To number 2. This is the third time we've tried to record this video, so I'm going to try to get through it without any major technical glitches or interruptions again. We spoke on the first video about skill rolling system and degrees of success, and that is the fundamental aspect of the game and how it's going to work when I run it. The second aspect is as follows. D&D has always had a problem with characters defending themselves. Now, the reason this happens is because D&D is descended from a tabletop game called Chainmail. And in that game, which was set for medieval battles, the heavier the armor that was on the figures, the more likely they were not to get hurt. And that mechanic has carried over through every D&D itineration all the way up to 5th Ed. Now, the problem with that is, although it's very representative of men shoulder to shoulder in the press, stabbing and pushing at one another like in shield walls, it does not match the feel of cinema or of the fantasy novels or heroic fiction that we're used to thinking of. You don't have characters leaping around. You don't have deft parries. You don't have feints. You don't have a lot of things we think of from the heroic fiction milieu. And so to capture that feeling, particularly for a game like Dungeon Punk, which is based off an idea of a combination urban fantasy environment, there's going to be a lot of instances where the characters are not wearing armor or not even using their favorite weapon. Now, D&D in 3rd edition and in 3.5 had this thing they come up with to kind of solve this. Two roles in particular, which I have slightly modified for Dungeon Punk. The first one was called the defense bonus rule, and this comes from the core Dungeon Master's Guide, and they used it for campaigns in which characters weren't often going to be wearing armor, such as if you're running a game of thieves. Now, I used this rule pristinely for a 3.5 version of Al-Qadim. And what I discovered very quickly, at starting around level 3, the heroes never got grappled or hit by any of the sentries. And that's a problem, because it takes a lot of the risk out of committing a crime, which is part of what Dungeon Punk is based off of, the risk factors. It takes that out of the equation. So, what I did is I took the same groups, and the groups for this defense bonus are based off of your character class and what its armor proficiency is, and I changed the totals for what's going to happen. Now, getting this defense bonus is done when your character is either not wearing armor, or the defense bonus for not wearing armor would be higher than the base armor class of the armor. So if the base armor class of the armor is 3 and your defense is a +5, you use the +5 instead. Now note how I said that. If the armor has a magical enhancement bonus, such as a +1 or +2 from being magically enchanted, then that armor also gives you the +2 on top of your normal defense bonus, making magical armor much more sought after, even if it's of lower grade than your defense bonus. Second, any property the magical armor has, such as energy resistance, still is conveyed to you, even though you're using the defense bonus. However, and I cannot stress this enough because some players have constantly tried to stack this, you cannot stack your defense bonus and your armor bonus. You can use your shield, you can use your dodge, but you cannot use your armor if you're using the defense bonus rule. And this is to keep the numbers within reasonable measure because the way the D&D combat system works. Now we have that cleared up. The groups are, Group A, anyone with no armor proficiency. That would be people such as, oh, hold on, it shifted on me, such as your scions, your wizards, and your sorcerers. Group B is people with light armor proficiency, assassins, bards, rogues, spell thieves, monks. Group C is anyone with medium armor proficiency, your barbarians, your rangers, your swashbucklers, and Group D is anyone with a heavy armor proficiency, your fighters, your paladins, and your clerics. Now, the reason why they broke these groups up into armor proficiency is that they're using the armor proficiency as a guide as to how used to close combat the character is. And I think that's actually a pretty good compromise. Now, the numbers in the core table were quite high, and what I've done is I've reduced them drastically. On the core table, Group D at level 20 had almost a +14 not to be hit. What I have done is I have lowered that number because we're going to have magical items in play, characters are likely to have high dexterity bonuses. Plus, if they drop a Kissed by Fate, they're going to jack their armor class more when they're trying to defend themselves. Or push their luck. So, on this table, you'll see the numbers increase, and how that would work is, let's say the base armor class is always 10, You have a dexterity bonus of, let's say, +2. That makes you up to 12 now. You've got a dodge bonus from the dodge feat of +1. Now you're up to 13. And let's say you're in Group C and you're level 11. We had 5. That gives you a total AC of 18. Now, don't fret, because I know game min-maxers are going to look at this and say, well, wait a minute. If my Group D fighter at level 10 has only a +5, and he doesn't have a dexterity bonus because he's a fighter, that means his armor class is only 15. Well, yeah, that's why he typically wears heavier armor. But does that mean that another level 10 fighter still has a better than 50% chance to hit him? Yes, it does. Which is why we're going to get into some other stuff. Again, this first rule is just for the modifying of the base armor class that you're going to use against attack totals. It's to give your character a bit of a cushion, not a guarantee that they won't get hit. So I'll say your character wants to guarantee they don't get hit. In the original 3.5 guide, they had this rule in the DMG that allowed you to roll a d20, and if it was higher than 10, to subtract 10 and add that to your armor class for the round. The problem was it's a 50% chance doing that, you get Bubkiss. And if you get Bubkiss, why are you doing it? Especially since it required you go full defense to do so. So what we've done is we replaced that rule with what we call cinematic combat or cinematic defense. Here's how this is going to work. Every round of combat, or for every 5 minutes outside of combat that you're using cinematic defense, such as maybe a character running across rooftops trying to evade combat and arrows being fired at him, you roll a d10 and add that d10 to your armor class total. Now there are some prices for doing this. First, if you elect to do this, you give up any multiple attacks you had in the round, even if you had feats like 2-weapon fighting. You're restricted to one single attack in the round by doing this. Think of Luke Skywalker in Star Wars parrying with his lightsaber parry, 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 blasting bolt parry, and he lashes out once every few seconds at somebody with the lightsaber to hit at them. That kind of reflexive defense is what we're looking for with this rule. Second, you cannot use any feats, class abilities, exceptional abilities, supernatural abilities, spell-like abilities, any spells or psionics to take an aggressive action while you're using this rule. So you can't declare this rule and suddenly burning hand somebody. Nor could you, if you have the supernatural ability to do so, use this rule and suddenly haste yourself. Cinematic combat represents you're concentrating on the area immediately around you. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, should you wish to use cinematic combat, and then in that same round or same scene, stop using it, you could do so. But it's going to cost you a kiss by fate. Let me give you the example I see this working. Let's say you have some tiny bard character, I can't imagine whom I mean, declaring cinematic defense to jack their armor class so that nobody hits them in combat. And they're running through the combat, dodging along, carrying a health potion, trying to get to a wounded comrade. Once they get to the comrade, their intention, since it's not an aggressive action, is to pour the potion down their throat and get this person back up and running. Perfectly viable under cinematic combat. However, when they get there, they realize that there are a pair of foes standing right next to their target, and they can only get one attack, right? They've got to heal this person. They've got to save them. So when they get up to where they would normally be in close combat, they elect, okay, I'm spending a kiss by fate, and I go multiple attack, putting an attack at each of the bad guys, hoping to take them out. That would represent them running across the battlefield, intent on nothing but getting to the target, and then once they get there, going their full attack thing. But it's going to cost them the kiss by fate use, because they're sort of altering fate. They're playing the odds. They're pushing their luck kind of thing, right? And you don't have as many of those as you think. This brings us to another way to defend yourself, because you want to really hedge your bets. In real combat, people hedge their bets by carrying shields. I have never understood why D&D, a game based on armor, would only make it possible for a shield to add a +1 for you not to be hit. A mere 5% chance. My own experience reenacting it with martial arts says that even a buckler is damned annoying to get around. So if you have a shield in Dungeon Punk, even a buckler, and you are aware of the attack coming at you, if that attack was going to hit you, in other words, they've already calculated your armor class, they rolled it, they're going to get a hit, you have an option. It's called Reflexive Parry. This represents moving the shield into the path of the attack at the last instant. To do this, the size of the shield is the first consideration. On this table, you'll see we've rated shields from sizes from buckler, small, medium, large, and wall. A buckler is not going to stop a dragon breathing fire on you. It's simply too small. Nor is it going to stop any spells. You can use it to stop melee attacks. You might be able to stop a missile attack, maybe. You'll notice there's a little asterisk by the yes there. That means there's an extra +2 DC for the attempt. Because what you're going to do is you're going to make a certain type of roll to see if you get higher than the opponent's attack total to hit you. Now, small shields are the next step up. And unlike bucklers, they don't have any additional modifier to a missile attack. But they still won't stop a spell or a breath weapon. A good example of a small shield is the Scottish Charge, Targe. It's a little bit bigger than a buckler. You see people carry them into combat. You often see reenactors use something on like living chess matches at Ren fairs about that size. And historically, you would have seen it with light infantry, particularly in the pike and shot period. Medium shields are where shields come into their own in this system. These are shields that you commonly see depicted of a knight riding on horseback. The shield is somewhat large, but it's still small enough that it's not going to hinder his movement on the horse or his attacks from the horse. It's got no modifier and can stop melee, missiles, spells, but it does have a modifier against a breath weapon. Now you know why this is also the entry level we see on those knights and paladins getting ready to go out there and slay dragons. Large shields are where the shield starts having no modifiers to this reflexive parry system. A large shield can be demonstrated by the large round shields you see in Anglo-Saxon cultures. If you've ever watched the Netflix series The Last Kingdom or seen the TV series Vikings, those are round shields. Typically they're shields that also are used to start a basic shield wall with some crimping and cramping and gaps in the wall here and there. Then we get to wall shields. Wall shields are the classical Roman tower shield. They're meant to be used side by side by a whole unit, and they're damn near impenetrable to get an arrow through or a spear thrust. Wall shields, however, have some disadvantages in melee combat, which are already accounted for in the D&D combat system. Now, looking at reflexive parry, there are some modifiers. You're going to see up here a modifier for any close combat attack. You add +0 to the DC that you're trying to beat, the DC being the attack total plus this modifier. Hurled weapons travel a little bit faster, so they increase the DC by +2, meaning it's harder to block them. Fast-moving missiles and arrows increase it by +4, breath weapons by +6, and a spell or supernatural ability by +8, because those happen almost at the speed of thought. Whereas the dragon takes a second to go whoosh, giving you a little bit of a warning. A spell after the guy is doing it, you're not sure exactly when it's going to stop. Bam, it can hit you, and supernatural abilities, like psionic abilities, just happen by thought. So how do I determine my DC? So what we do is the defender is going to roll against the attack total that hit them. You add the modifier of the attack type, and then the defender rolls their highest base attack bonus, plus their shield bonus, plus their dexterity bonus, and tries to beat that number. So if someone is attacking you with a sword and they score a 12, the attack type modifier is close combat, that's +0. You need to roll a 12 or better to defend yourself. Now you don't get to add your armor. Excuse me. You don't get to add your armor or your defense bonus. But let's say you have a BAB of +2. Well, now you only need a 10 or better to hit that sword, right? And you were carrying a shield, and shields normally have at least a +1 shield bonus. Now you need a 9 or better. And you've got a dex bonus of +1 or +2. Suddenly you only need a 7 or better to block that shot. It's starting to sound really good. Well, to keep it somewhat within the realm of needing to roll really high to guarantee this, because it is a last moment parry, just because you tied the attack total doesn't mean you got away scot-free. We've instituted a rule here that if the result of your reflexive parry is between +0 to +4, the defender will still take half damage. Think of it kind of like a saving throw. And if the result is +5 or more over the attack total, then and only then do you take no damage. And I didn't write it in the Dungeon Pack rules, but I would at times allow you, if you have an exceptionally high roll, like let's say you're +20 over this attack roll, you parried that thing so well that you've upset your opponent's timing or maybe taken them off stride, I might give you an AOO because you obviously take them off their stride or hit them so hard that they're backing up or they're staggered. Now, what about magical weapons and breath weapons? Sorry, magical attacks and breath weapons. So what we do for that is we take the character or the level of the spell +10, or the hit dice divided by 2, and add the attack type modifier to give you your total DC. This means that spells and breath weapons, in a way, are somewhat easier to reflexively parry, but at the same time, because of the massive modifier, it's not really going to show up as an advantage until higher levels. For instance, a level 1 spell such as Burning Hands would have a base of 11, 10 plus 1 for the spell. But then it also adds +8 for being a magical attack, giving you a total of 19. That means a first level fighter with a +1 shield and no dex bonus would have probably only about a 10% chance to block that shot. I think I calculated his total as 15% chance altogether. Let me do that again real quick. 1 for the shield. You need a 19 or 20, so there's 10% base, then 1 for the shield. Yeah, 15% chance to block it. Now, as he goes up in level, his BAB, particularly for fighters, which increases by +1 per level, is going to make this much more likely. A 5th level fighter against the same spell would only have to roll a 13 or higher. That's amazing, right? Now, another complication to the reflexive parry is you have to take into account position. If someone's on your flanks, that's going to count. If they're behind you and you can't see them at all, then no, you can't reflexive parry. But the flank is a little odd. If the character's staggered or clobbered, those things all come into account. Anything that would complicate a normal attack roll. Because what the reflexive parry is essentially a different version of the attack of opportunity. And speaking of that concept, you are limited to as many reflexive parries as you have attacks of opportunity, which gives you another reason to take the combat reflexes feat. Now, doesn't it, Mr. Fighter? This means that most people only get 1 reflexive parry per round, so it doesn't overpower the combat system. You're not going to have a mob of people attack the character, and he sits there and blocks every single one with reflexive parry. Unless he's got combat reflexes, and then that would make sense, because rather than attack all these guys coming at him, he's blocking them instead. And I felt that was a fair compromise. Now, one other consideration to that. If you go over, like let's say you've lost initiative, and you get mobbed, and you reflexive parry all these guys, if you go over your amount of normal attacks of opportunity for a round, you lose all your attacks for the round. And that's to represent you getting harried so much just trying to defend yourself that you forget trying to attack anybody. Again, another compromise I made for the combat system, which now makes a mob of kobolds or goblins really dangerous, because if 8 of them mob your fighter, you got a problem, Bubba. All right. Other things that modify this. The full defense bump. Should a character declare a full defense, and that is still part of the combat system from the straight D&D game, that full defense bonus to their armor class is also added to the reflexive parry attempts because it represents them actively defending. The same thing with our cinematic combat rule. If you declared cinematic combat, that bonus from your D10 is also added to all your reflexive parries, representing you trying to get out of the way of danger and block any attempts to your person. Now, some of the numbers of the modification table may seem a little excessive, but I did it for play balance reasons. At lower levels, it's going to make the reflexive parry a thing that might happen, but you can't rely on it. At mid-levels, you can start to trust it. At high levels, this is going to make a high-level character, even one without armor, almost impossible to be hit by a character that's lower level and that they're aware of. It also begins to make spells less dangerous. That's okay. In Dungeon Punk, there are ways to jack those numbers even further, and there's a lot of getting hit from behind because, again, it's a game about stealth and tricking you. So I want the players to have advantages and make them feel like they have some control over their character's fate by skill and by careful planning, but I never want them to feel like it's always a guaranteed thing. We'll go into this a little bit more when I talk about some of the inspiration for Dungeon Punk. I'm actually basing a lot of what I've done to the game system not only off cinematic movies for combat, but in tone, off the confessions of real world criminals and what it's like to actually be a criminal for a life choice and how dangerous and nerve-wracking it actually is. I think in the next one, we're going to talk a little bit more about combat. We're going to talk about some of the things I've added if I've not already gone through to it in the first one, which I don't think I did. And those are special combat states we've added, such as being bloodied, clobbered, mortally wounded, and knocked out. Oh, as well as lingering wounds. I don't think I covered those in the first video. If I did, then I'll go into some of the more things about stealth and how stealth is going to be complicated greatly in the game since it's a major focus. All right, so that was number 2. I hope you liked it. I hope it clears up some rules about how we're running game. I don't want anyone to ever feel ambushed at the session. And tune in for number 3, hopefully not coming a month late, but I got caught up writing and editing a novel.